later. This book is Soldiers of Color Who Fought at Saratoga. And thanks to Reverend Harper, I just added a new name. I did not have the name of Britton Nichols in my database. And now he made number 807, Soldiers of Color Who Fought at Saratoga. And this is participants in the Boston Tea Party. And you have quite a few here. We'll talk about that. And I'm not hawking books because I have 4 books finished, but no publisher. If anyone knows a publisher, please let me know. My first book was Patriots of Color at Battle Road. That's Lexington and Concord. And you're welcome to look at Patriots of Color at Bunker Hill. And last year I finished all the soldiers at Battle Road, 4,200. And just this winter, I finished the soldiers at Bunker Hill. 2,700 confirmed names, so you're welcome to look at all those. Wow. So I'll ask Maura if she can shut off all the lights to give a better view of the screen. So we're here. What brought us all here today is a soldier named Britton Nichols that Reverend Harper found fought at Saratoga. And he was from Cohasset, and he went up to Saratoga and was there at the time of the second Battle of Saratoga, the 2 major battles. And we'll talk about Britton. What I've done is talk about Cohasset in general at the beginning of the talk, and then we're going to switch to Saratoga and try to give you an armchair view of what was Britton seeing, what was he doing, where was he on the battlefield, what news was he getting. The news was pretty bad at the time he was on the battlefield. We were losing battle after battle. And just the fact that he was there with 800 other soldiers of color. And at the end, we have a 15-minute film clip that a good friend of mine allowed me to show here today that is about the second Battle of Saratoga. So you can actually kind of see what Britton was watching that day. So I have a lot of people to thank too. I'll let you look at the list, specifically Katie and Jonathan Lane, who got Katie and me together, and Reverend Harper, and Paula, who I talked with about Britton from Hingham, and Maura, thanks to this nice venue, Maura, and being here an hour early to all set up and get things working. A good friend that I just lost, Priscilla Draga, who was always encouraging me to do the Battle of Saratoga. Eric Snitzer was also a friend. He's park ranger at Saratoga, and he was able to help me. I didn't really know where Britton's unit was at the time of the battle, and he helped me get it pretty close, I think. So I'll let you know that. And last, my friend Chris Stearns, who did the documentary on Benedict Arnold, which includes the Battle of Saratoga. So we are at the 250th, and it's technically called the semi-quincentennial. And today is March 1st, and let's go back to March 1st, 1776. What was happening on that day? It was a momentous day at the Siege of Boston. But first I'll talk to you about my own journey, what started me on this quest. My dad took me one day. We used to have panels in every town in Maine that would have a list of the soldiers who served in that town, that most of them were handmade. And one day when I was about 9 years old, we went to one of these panels where my dad's name was at the Battle of the Bulge. And I saw these stars on the panel. I asked my dad, what do those mean? And those are the men that were killed in battle. And that did something. Here's my dad's name. So I started searching my own family. By the time I was 13, I got really into genealogy. And I found here is my own ancestor who was in the Revolutionary War. And he is only about one of 20 Revolutionary War soldiers who actually had a photograph taken. He lived that long. He lived into the 1850s. Conrad Hyre, he was at the Battle of Trenton with Washington. And I started branching out, and I started seeing these names, and I was a stamp collector at the time and saw this stamp in 1975, Salem Poor, and it got me interested in black soldiers who fought in the Revolution. And then I started a whole quest, Revolutionary War, just total mindset. And here's another black soldier, and I started seeing these strange names. There's a 17-volume set of soldiers from Massachusetts called Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors. And I've never found an error in that 17-volume set. That's how good it is. And I came to this and I said, no, this is a mistake. Newport, Rhode Island, and this was actually a man's name. His first name was Newport, and his last name was Rhode Island. And he was a black soldier, and I tracked him down. He ended up dying in Maine, at Deer Isle, Maine. I went and searched for his gravestone, and no one knows where it is, but he was at the Battle of, see it says Hubbleton, they didn't have it quite right. That's the Battle of Hubbardton, Vermont. And that was a terrible loss for the Patriots, but he was right in the midst of it. So let's go back to 1773. What's going on? We've got the destruction of the tea on December 16th. The 3 tea ships that come into harbor, and they had not yet unloaded the tea, and this was a big deal. If that tea were to get unloaded and touch American soil, it was automatically taxed. So the Patriots wanted to catch it before it got taxed. So that means you had some options. You could go out in the harbor, you could sink these ships, you could set them on fire, and what they decided to do, no destruction, they decided to go out in the night and board the ships and just throw the tea into the harbor. And not to bother the tea ships. As a matter of fact, during the destruction, somebody broke a lock on one of the tea vessels, and the very next morning, they were surprised to find a brand new lock sitting there. One of the participants had actually gone in during the night and fixed the lock, so that no one could say that they damaged anything but the tea. So you were blessed in town here to have 4 Boston Tea Party participants who came from Cohasset. That's a pretty big deal. I'll show you in a second. Here's Jared Joy. His gravestone is right here in town. He was a bricklayer. And there's Abraham Tower. His gravestone's here in town. He was a fisherman. And Aaron Pratt Sr. And I just met Mr. Pratt. So here's your ancestor. He was a farmer, and he was in the Tea Party. And James Stoddard, who was a shipwright here in town, was in the Tea Party. And I just read a story about James Stoddard. I hadn't heard this story. That after the British left Boston and evacuated in March of 1776, lo and behold, in comes a rum ship full of rum for the British soldiers. And they didn't know that the British had left. Well, James Stoddard gets a crew together really quickly, gets a vessel and goes out and captures the rum vessel. So there was some good times in Cohasset that night, I guess. What's that? Not that I know of. That would be nice. So I've done a study of the Tea Party participants. And here is a list of where they were from highest to lowest. And you can see most were from Boston. But look who's number 6 on the list, Cohasset. You had a big part in the Boston Tea Party. And I think if we want to fudge just slightly, there was another man named Adam Beals from Cohasset. And he had just moved to Chesterfield. So if you want to claim him as a Cohasset man, I think you have a good right to, and that would make 5. I think he actually probably came back to visit his family and ended up in the Tea Party while he was here. So let's go to 1774. Things are getting bad. The British didn't like that tea being thrown in the harbor. They were about as angry as they could possibly get. So they started to punish the Americans. They closed the port of Boston. No more in trade, no more out trade. Town meetings essentially outlawed. Massachusetts colonial legislature, the general court, essentially dissolved. And how did the Patriots react to this? Was not much they could do about the closure of the port of Boston when you got like 4,000 British troops came in to occupy the city. But the town meetings outlawed. They said, sorry, you're not going to do that. And so all the town meetings all over this area kept going in complete defiance of the king. The legislature dissolved, no, sorry. And what they did is elected, they already had their elected representative, but they formed the provincial congress. And that would meet in various places all around. At the time of Battle Road, battles of Lexington and Concord, this Congress was meeting in Concord. And the president was John Hancock. So they had a whole complete government running Massachusetts, but it was sitting in Concord, not in Boston anymore. And what are the ordinary people doing as a result of this crackdown by the British? They're starting to gather arms. They know that something is probably very bad going to happen. So here are some of the stories of some of the soldiers I found. One Worcester soldier, I purchased the bayonet and tomahawk at enlistment and trained half a day a week, and when there was moonlight. A Framingham soldier, I spent many an evening with a number of my near neighbors going through the exercise in the barn floor with my mittens on. Talk about dedication. And a Sudbury soldier. The militia companies followed the example of the Minutemen and performed nearly an equal share of duty without pay, training by moonlight or drilling in squads by the light of a lantern on a barn floor. These people are dedicated. So we come to 1775. Things are getting worse and worse, and we have in May the taking of Fort Ticonderoga by the Americans, taking it away from the British. This is a very big deal for what we're going to talk about with the Siege of Boston, because this is where there are cannon, big cannon, and Washington is going to need those cannon. So we capture Ticonderoga and capture all of those big British cannon. Then there's Lexington, April 19th. And then there's Concord Bridge, and I just found out from Katie that one of her ancestors fought at Concord Bridge. And then, after all of the fighting on April 19th, thousands and thousands of soldiers, about 20,000, had showed up. And they all come to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the powers that be say, we want to stop the British from ever doing this again, ever going out in the countryside. And they encircle Boston with soldiers. And this is called the Siege of Boston. And it started right after the battles of Lexington and Concord. So then we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. And then we have a general who shows up here in Cambridge, George Washington, and takes command of this ragtag army. And we have stories. He wrote to his wife right after he got here, and it was a story in a letter like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? These were really ragtag guys. No common equipment, no common uniforms, poor habits like with hygiene and things like that. And the biggest problem he tackled right away that he did not like to see lack of discipline. So he started on that right away. And I wondered, did the Cohasset men go to Cambridge to join Washington? And I couldn't find them. Maybe somebody can help me. I didn't find them going to Cambridge, and I started wondering, well, what are they doing? If they didn't go to Cambridge, there had to be a really good reason, because everybody went to Cambridge. And I started looking for a primary source, and I found it in the papers of the Provincial Congress. Washington actually told the Cohasset men, stay where you are. We're very worried about the British coming in to Hull and to Nantasket, and I want you to guard these places. And Washington told them, get all of the food and supplies and everything out of Hull and take it inland away from the British. And so that's what the Cohasset men were doing right after Lexington conquered. So later in the year, we have the Arnold expedition to Quebec. Washington picked out 1,000 men out of his 15,000 men and sent them to attack Quebec City through Maine. And a Cohasset man, once again, Adam Beals, the same man who had gone and participated in the Tea Party, also went on this expedition. So we're still at the Siege of Boston, and we come to 1776. So Washington wants to attack Boston, and he always gets his major generals all in a room, and he has them vote. And he's always the one vote to want to attack Boston, and all of them say no. It's too much. And so he says, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to send Henry Knox, my colonel of the artillery, I'm going to send him up to Ticonderoga, where we have all of those beautiful cannon, and I'm going to ask him to bring them to Boston. And so this was the amazing project that was given to Henry Knox to carry those approximately 50, 60 cannon all the way from Ticonderoga across the Hudson River and bring them to Washington. And they did it. It's an amazing feat in the American Revolution. So we have here, I'm sorry. So what we have here is the cannon arrived in Cambridge the 27th of January, 1776. And then Washington starts dispersing these so valuable cannon all around the siege lines. And March 2nd, he puts some at Leechmer's Point over in Cambridge at Cobble Hill. He puts some on a place called Lamb's Dam in Roxbury. And then March 4th, he's bringing them to Dorchester Heights and setting them up. You all know where that is, right? Yeah, very close by. So you can see that around the time, exactly 250 years ago, exact this time, Washington is distributing his cannon around the siege lines of Boston. So here we have March 4th. Washington puts most of his big guns right there on Dorchester Heights and aims them at Boston. This is bad news for the British. This is not good, because these are powerful cannon and they can hit Boston. You see Boston's way in the background there, but they can hit Boston. And so down here, you had a company here in Cohasset. Captain Obadiah Beals was called up by Washington, and Washington evidently said, okay, I need you now, and took them away from their duties here in Cohasset, Hull, Nantasket, and said, I need you at Dorchester. And these 20 men went up to help Washington at Dorchester Heights. So what happened was, the British said, if you cannonade us from Dorchester Heights, we will burn down the city of Boston. And Washington didn't want that to happen. So Washington sent back a counteroffer. You have to leave. And they said, we will leave. Just let's call a truce and we will leave. So they left. March 17th, 1776. It's called Evacuation Day, and that's when they left in that pretty much that's the whole time that your Cohasset men were doing duty. They were at Dorchester. Washington really felt that the British might come and attack Dorchester Heights. So these men were in a very critical position. And so the British leave Boston. That's it. There's a lot of cheering going on. Some people say, well, the British are gone, we've won the war. And Washington, no. I don't know what's going to happen next, but this is not the end of this. So the British sailed all the way to Nova Scotia, and they got rearmed, refitted, got extra men. So now we have Boston back again, and Boston is a mess. Right now, Boston has had a severe smallpox epidemic going on in Boston, and this was a terrible disease. I've studied it. It was 15 times worse than COVID. So think how bad we think COVID is, and multiply it by 15. You had a 30% chance of dying if you got smallpox. If you didn't die, there's a very good chance you would lose an arm or you would go blind. And if you survived that and didn't have that, you would have pock marks all over your face. So a lot of the men in Washington's army had smallpox, including Washington. And what he did, and it's a neat part of American history that is not hardly heard, he picked out 1,000 men from his army, all of whom had smallpox. And I call it the Pockmark Brigade. And he had them first march into Boston after the evacuation, just to cover the town, make sure the British didn't come back and attack. And these men, since they had smallpox once, were immune. So here is your speaker, along with fellow men in his company. Pretty serious guy there, your speaker. This is the 240th anniversary of Dorchester Heights, 10 years ago. So we come to 1777. What's happening in the colonies? Well, in the South, the British are focused on Georgia. Their plan is to go to the very south and capture Georgia, then capture South Carolina, then capture North Carolina, and then capture Virginia, and start making their way back to New York City. By the way, where did all those men from Boston go eventually? The British? New York City. And attacked Washington there, and he lost a huge battle. He lost the Battle of Long Island, and the British took over New York City. So the British plan, it's a great plan. We're going to take New York City. We're going to have a large army come and take Georgia and then march north. We're going to take Philadelphia, the capital of the colonists. And in the north, we're going to take Albany, and we're going to split the colonies in half. We're going to split off New England, these rebellious New Englanders. We're going to split them away from all the other 13 colonies and cause it to divide. So that's the grand plan. And if it had worked, the British would have won, but it didn't work. And we're going to talk about the northern part of the grand plan. The plan of the British was to take Albany, and they had three-pronged assault planned out. They were going to come in from the west on the Mohawk River. They were going to come from New York City on the south, and they were going to come from Canada on the north, and all come together at Albany, and then start working their way south again and join up with the Southern forces. And it was a great plan. We'll see how it fell apart. So Britton Nichols eventually becomes part of this plan. So the leader of the north part of this, coming from Canada, was John Burgoyne. He was an excellent leader. And so what he did first, he took Fort Ticonderoga. Now this, just imagine today if we heard like Camp Lejeune was taken over by an enemy, or some big American installation like that. This shocked the people of the colonies. This was theirs, and now the British had taken it, and it was a huge blow to the colonies. So riders went out, and here's what they were saying. To arms, to arms, Ty has fallen. You can't imagine how the people felt. This is about the worst news you could possibly get. And this is going to energize men all over the colonies to start to gather and to head for Albany. So then we have another great loss, the Battle of Hubbardton, Vermont. The British are coming more south. We lose Fort Anne on July 8th. We lose Fort Edward on July 29th. And there's a major siege of Fort Stanwix out in what's now Rome, New York. And this is about the only thing blocking that western part of the plan from reaching Albany. This is about the only real big problem in the way. And so the western contingent of the British sets up a siege of Fort Stanwix that lasts 20 days. And a large group of local soldiers went to try to help Fort Stanwix, and they got caught at the Battle of Riskin. They got ambushed, and it was one of, if not the bloodiest battle for the Americans in the whole war. Lost half their men, either killed or wounded. So we're losing on every front here. And then we finally have something to cheer about. The British went a little bit too far. They wanted to go get some horses and supplies in Bennington, and they didn't know that the riders that had gone out had energized thousands and thousands of American soldiers. And 2,000 soldiers showed up at Bennington. The Vermont Continental soldiers, Vermont militia, some New York militia, and a very, very large contingent of some Mass militia and a super large contingent of New Hampshire militia showed up out of nowhere and beat the British at Bennington. So this is the first good news any of these men have. So, okay, Bennington has just happened. I'm sure news has gotten to Cohasset. And General Gates up in Saratoga is calling out, "We need you." And he put out the call everywhere. And Cohasset got word, and Cohasset sends a company to Saratoga. And we have a diary of one of the men who went, Ambrose Bates. And you can see they started to form in Cohasset the 27th of August in 1777. They marched to Hingham, and then to Roxbury, to Sudbury, to Shrewsbury, to Spencer, to Ware, to Hadley, and to Northampton. So pretty much following today's Route 9 along there. And then I'm pretty sure what happened is they make a solid right turn at Northampton. And I'm pretty sure probably a messenger came from General Gates and said, "You go to Pollitt." Pollitt, Vermont was about halfway up Vermont, and that's where General Benjamin Lincoln was of Hingham, was gathering all of the soldiers from this area. And they said to the Cohasset man, "You go up and you join Benjamin Lincoln." So here's the company that went up to Saratoga. And the names in bright yellow are the names of the 4 Cohasset men in this company. Most of them were from other towns, but you can see Josiah Bates, Ambrose Bates, Ephraim Lincoln, and there he is, Britton Nichols. So then they went to Pollitt, where they joined Benjamin Lincoln. And where did they go from there? They didn't go to Saratoga to help General Gates. General Gates evidently told them, "I want you to go back and try to get Fort Ticonderoga back for us." So General Lincoln marched his men back up to Fort Ticonderoga, left Gates right behind in Saratoga, and they set up a siege there for 6 days. Found out that it was just too much to ask. This is a solid fortress. They captured all the area around Ty, but they could not capture Ty. And where was Britton Nichols? I'm told by Eric Snitcher, my friend, the guy at Saratoga NHP, that he thinks that they were over across the lake at Mount Independence. They were kept in the reserve in case Lincoln needed them over here, and eventually they didn't need them. Gates called them back to Saratoga. So you can see the time frame here, 18 to 24. Something is happening at Saratoga this exact same time. There's a huge battle that happens on the 19th of September, 1777 at Saratoga. The red is Burgoyne coming down the Hudson River, and the blue is the Americans. And they have a huge battle at Stillwater, New York. And it's essentially a tie, but the British maintain the battlefield. So whenever it's a tie, and whoever has the battlefield is called the winner. So pretty much the British won this first battle. And I've studied, I'm pretty sure about this, not 100%. Where was Britton Nichols? He's not here right yet. He's coming back from Ticonderoga, okay? So what's happening elsewhere? Philadelphia falls to the British during this time frame. And this is a big shock to the Americans also. And down on the southern part of the attack, Forts Clinton and Montgomery fall to the British. They put up one heck of a fight, but they're gone. So we've had loss after loss after loss after loss. And then we come to the 7th October, and that's the second Battle of Saratoga. Pretty much on the same battlefield with the same actors, but now we have Benjamin Lincoln is back with his militia. And he is set up here at Bemis Heights. Bemis Heights is the tallest point around, and that's where the Americans have set up their cannon. And you can see the British are north of them. And the British could have come down this road was here, but they would have been bombarded by cannon. So what the British do is they attack around the flank. They don't want to come straight down. All the cannon are right here, and this is the Alamo for the Americans. If they start losing, this is where they're going to fall back to, and this is where they'll put up their last stand. So if I got this right, I think Britton Nichols was right about here. He was on the farthest right of the American Army. And almost all the action happened over on the left with Benedict Arnold, Daniel Morgan, the New Hampshire Continentals, the Massachusetts Continentals, all fighting here at the second battle. And that was an American victory, a huge victory. So here's a present day look at Bemis Heights. And Britton Nichols, I think, would have been just down below the top of this, probably with an entrenchment down below the heights, on the far right of the American lines. So there's still things happening in all these three prongs. On the southern prong, they finally give up and say, we're not going to make it to Albany. And in spite, they take the most beautiful, it was considered the most beautiful town along the Hudson River, Kingston, New York, and they burn it flat. Hundreds and hundreds of homes, barns, shops, businesses, and burn it completely flat. And in the history book of Kingston, New York, they always show this poor picture here. Only one house survived, and so they always put a picture of this house. And the British give up the southern part of the attack. They've already given up the western part, and Burgoyne has been defeated on the northern part. So all three parts of the British attack plan have now failed. So Burgoyne has no real option but to surrender. And in the pensions of the men, they all mention, I was at the surrender of General Burgoyne. It meant so much to them. And they were lined up on both sides of the road and watched Burgoyne's men march before them in total defeat. And most of Burgoyne's men were marched back to Cambridge, and from there they went back to England. An interesting little sidebar on this, as the British soldiers were marching in complete defeat down through the American ranks, guess what tune the American musicians played? Yankee Doodle. That was a tune developed by the British to make fun of Americans. Yankee, of course, is an American. You know what doodle means? A dimwit. So they made up a tune that was American dimwits. And sure enough, when they lost, our musicians played Yankee Doodle, and from that point on it became an American tune. So here's some of the comments about the Second Battle of Saratoga. It was a glorious sight to see the haughty Britons march out and surrender their arms to an army which but a little before they despised and called poltroons. Poltroon is about the worst thing you could call a person back in 1777. It meant a coward, and worse than a coward, it meant like a sniveling coward, the worst of cowards. And British changed their mind after that. And what did Burgoyne have to say? He says, wherever I point my forces, thousands and thousands of militia show up. What happened here? A man wrote in the 1800s, what are the 15 most important battles that ever happened on the face of the earth? And Saratoga was one of those 15. And Britton Nichols was there. And even though he did not get into the fighting, one of his fellow soldiers, I read in his pension, he said, we saw the Second Battle of Saratoga. They were over on the far right. They were kept in reserve and not fighting. So even though Britton Nichols didn't physically fight, he was there. And that made a huge difference. So all three attack lines, the western attack was stopped 110 miles from Albany. The northern attack was stopped 37 miles from Albany. And the southern attack was stopped 56 miles from Albany. And it never made it to Albany. So, okay, now we've won. The Cohasset men can head home, but not quite yet. Gates sends them south. He sends them to East Chester, New York, and I've tried to figure out why, but I think I know why. East Chester is just above New York City, and this was called no man's land. It was the space in between a large part of American forces on the northern Hudson and the British in New York City. And you did not want to go into no man's land. The old accounts say that it was full of cowboys. Now we think of cowboys like the Westerns. Back then, a cowboy meant a person who would come out of the bushes on the side of the road and attack you and take everything you had. So this was a very bad place to be. They were stationed there for a little while, and then they had home to Cohasset. And I figured the distances that they walked, 732 miles. So these men really put out. So our freedom was purchased at great cost. And now I'll play the film clip, if you want. And Laura and is Jay, right? This is 15 minutes of the documentary on Benedict Arnold, which I was a contributor to, and my good friend Chris Stearns allowed us to watch this. It involves the Second Battle of Saratoga.
Among the new arrivals are free blacks, numbering over 400. These free black soldiers will serve with valor at Saratoga.
This fighting for freedom became very, very important for the free black, and many of them enlisted and volunteered to fight. This will be the most integrated army that we will see until really the 1960s in Vietnam.
2 long weeks pass. Despite the urging of Arnold and other officers, Gates refuses to go on the offensive. This hesitation allows the British time to strengthen their fortified lines.
Burgoyne was getting increasingly desperate. As the weeks passed, his supply line back to Canada was getting weaker and weaker.
So he's either got to retreat or he's got to attack them. On the 7th of October, he sends out a third of his army in a strong reconnaissance force to find the Americans' left flank. And when he finds it, he is either the next day going to attack them around that flank or withdraw back toward Canada. That's his plan.
Aware of the British troop movement, Morgan pleads with Gates to send troops to meet them. Finally, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Gates agrees to let the game begin. The Second Battle of Saratoga is unleashed, and the fighting is fierce. The Americans are taking heavy losses. Arnold, having no command authority, waits at his headquarters listening to the roar of distant cannons.
General Arnold, I have received reports.
An aide reports that the Americans are disorganized on the field and losing ground to the British advance. Frustrated, he disobeys orders. He rallies the men back to the fight. The troops are inspired by the return of their beloved commander and follow him valiantly. When he arrives on the scene, the American line is in total disarray.
Fall in, men! Fall in! Fall in!
The smoke, the shrieks and the dying, the groans of the wounded, the cannonballs whizzing overhead, it's just chaos reigning supreme. And suddenly on the battlefield arrives this leader, this person that they all know and respect. It's Benedict Arnold, and his presence on the field electrifies the men, and they are confident at that point in this counterattack that he's now taking charge of, that things are going to turn out all right. They're confident that now he's here, he knows what he's doing, we'll follow him.
Arnold spots Brigadier General Simon Fraser, one of the most revered and accomplished commanders of the whole British Army. He orders Morgan to place one of his sharpshooters in position to kill this crucial enemy officer. This sniper attack on an officer was inconceivable to the British and their sense of battlefield honor.
Fraser is mortally wounded and will die the next day. He is one of the first British generals to be killed in combat by a U.S. marksman.
The loss of General Fraser turned the fate of the day. Lieutenant William Digby, British 53rd Light Company.
Under Arnold's bold leadership, they drive them back behind fortifications designed to protect Burgoyne's left flank.
Blasts of British cannon and musket fire force the Americans back. Americans find it very difficult to advance as the battle becomes a stalemate, with each army trading volleys of lead, until Arnold rallies his men.
Arnold, inspired by the fury of a demon, led one of the Patriot charges. Riding in front of the line, his eyes flashing, with a voice that rang clear as a trumpet, he called upon the men to follow him, and he hurled them like a tornado on the British line. Nothing could exceed the bravery of Arnold on this day. There seemed to shoot out from him a magnetic flame that electrified his men and made heroes of them all. Captain Ebenezer Whitfield.
He breaks through the redoubt commanded by the highly disciplined Hessian Colonel Heinrich von Bremen. Rebels pour into the gaping hole and overwhelm the Germans, their pots and pans still boiling as they flee. Until this day, no American commander or army ever defeated a standing British force in battle. Saratoga will be the pinnacle of Arnold's military career as a rebel officer and a personal triumph over tremendous hardship. Fighting alongside his men, they have overcome brutal conditions in the Maine wilderness, the Canadian winter at the walls of Quebec, starvation and horrific death from smallpox. They have confronted the Royal Navy at Lake Champlain and have routed the most professional army in the world. And it is Benedict Arnold who led them. Amid the chaos, a young Hessian soldier fires at Arnold.
Our general thought little of danger and forced his way through and spared none, till a ball broke his leg and killed his horse, Oliver Borden, Continental soldier.
American troops rushed to his side. Slammed to the ground by the attacking American troops, the young Hessian is about to be killed.
No, spare the boy.
Major Henry Dearborn asked if he is badly hurt. Arnold is reported to have said, "The same leg. I wish the ball had passed through my heart." A messenger sent by Gates informs him that he is being removed from the field of battle for disobeying orders. Before the first battle of Saratoga at Freeman's Farm, Arnold had run into a group of men from the Connecticut militia and promised all of them one thing that morning, that if the day be long enough, they would have all the British in hell before nightfall. Now, as the sun set at the close of the battles of Saratoga, Arnold held true to his promise, but he could not foresee the personal toll of victory.
And Arnold was carried back to his tent in agony again, but the Battle of Saratoga was as good as over. It was as good as won, because the British now had to retreat.
The British were surrounded by American forces. After 4 months of campaigning, Burgoyne had lost over 1/3 of his entire army. He credited Arnold publicly for, in his words, the success obtained over him, and he must have known how his failure would be received in Parliament.
Under perpetual fire, I have been with my armies in the jaws of famine. Shot through my hat and waistcoat, my nearest friends killed around me. From these combined misfortunes, I imagine I am reserved to stand a war with ministers in London, who will always lay the blame upon the employed who miscarries.
I won't lose my neck, Doctor. I will not have it amputated.
Benedict Arnold lay mortally wounded in an Albany hospital.
Save it.
His leg shattered. He threatened to shoot anybody who tried to amputate it.
What? And he must have been devastated, destroyed as a man. He gave everything. Gates gave nothing. And Gates walks away with the honor, with the glory, and the sword of General Burgoyne.
Thank you, General.
I accept your sword of surrender.
The strategic significance of Saratoga cannot be overestimated. It really is the birth of liberty in the modern world. Because what it does, it sets in train a set of falling dominoes which ultimately lead to British defeat in North America. It was Benedict Arnold, his military skill, his courage, his heroism, that pushes over.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Are you accepting questions?
Maybe after Dr. Harper's.
Oh, yes, Dan Harper, is going to come up and say a little bit more.
I got upgraded from Mr. to Doctor. I'm actually a Mr. but thank you.
Reverend.
Can we have the lights on? I don't have these. So I'm going to fill in a little bit of the Cohasset stuff for us. He's the guy who really knows it. And I have to say, so I lived most of my life in Concord, Massachusetts, where I was a licensed tourist guide. And I also worked for a time at the Church of the Minuteman in Lexington on the Battle Green. Everybody knew about George Quintal. And to follow him is intimidating, to say the least. And in addition to that, there's a few local historians in here, like Woody Chittick, who's the one who told me about Britt Nichols. So you don't credit me, credit Woody Chittick right there. You two need to meet. And we have a professional tour guide right here, Mary, who's, so this is an intimidating crowd. You guys know more than I. And honestly, the 18th century is not my strong suit. Most of my local history research has been in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Fortunately, Paula Baggers of the Hingham Historical Society kindly reviewed my brief talk. So she removed the worst errors. Any remaining errors are mine. So we don't know much about Britt Nichols of Cohasset, to be honest. Actually, we don't know much about most working class or enslaved people in the 18th century or until their names appear in legal documents, in a census, or in military records. So much of what we know about Britt Nichols comes from his military records. And we know almost nothing about the first half of his life. He appears in a will from 1757 when he was 17 years old, and he was enslaved at that time by Nathaniel Nichols Sr. This is the only solid fact that I have found out about Britt Nichols for the first 36 years of his life. So we know much more about him once he begins serving in the military. His first recorded service was with the Hinghamtown Militia at Hull on March 16th, 1776.
Wow.
Not in the national records, that's from Hingham Historical Society. This was the day before the British evacuated Boston. We heard George talk about that. He would have been one of the many local men from Hingham Hall and Cohasset called upon to defend our coastline. His term of service probably only lasted a few days. There's not good records, but that was a typical term of service. In 1777, Britt Nichols enlisted in the Continental Army. And this time he served, as we heard George talk about, for an extended period of time far from home. So we can only speculate why he decided to enlist at age 37. He's probably married, he may even have had a child. Perhaps military service was going to allow him to free himself from slavery. Perhaps his enslaver enlisted him against his own wishes. In any case, as we heard, he and a contingent of soldiers from Cohasset marched together out to Saratoga, New York. And as we heard, Ambrose Bates, one of Britain's messmates, kept a diary during their military service. You can read that in the book, A Narrative History of Cohasset by Victor Bigelow. And they reached, so we learned from Ambrose Bates that they reached Saratoga in early September, joined the fight against General Burgoyne, and the Bates diary shows that most of their service was filled with boredom. So any of you who've had military service will recognize that. That's what my dad always talked about, how boring it was. Several days were filled with monotonous marching back and forth from one place to another. And on many days, Bates simply records, "Nothing new today." And those days of boredom were interspersed with days with more than enough excitement. So, for example, on October 7th, Bates recorded, "Today we had a fight. We were alarmed about noon, and the fight begun. The sun 2 hours high, and at night we drove them back and took field pieces and took some prisoners." You can just imagine, that's a very short couple of sentences, but it must have been quite a day. So eventually, as we heard, the Continental forces prevailed. The British finally surrendered on October 16th, and thereafter Bates records that he and the Cohasset men marched to Tarrytown. And their service in Tarrytown was much less exciting, according to Bates. And finally, on November 30th, their term of military service ended. They began marching home. And they must have set a quick pace, because Bates says they arrived back at Cohasset on December 7th, which I figured out is about 25 miles a day. So in the year 1779, Brent Nichols enlisted for 2 more terms of military service. His first term of service began on May 24th, 1779 in Tiverton, Rhode Island, and lasted for 39 days. And since the British had not yet evacuated from Newport, it's possible that he saw action in Rhode Island, but I was unable to find any records. Maybe that's something you could look into someday in your copious free time. And then Brent Nichols next served from October 20th to November 23rd in the North River Valley. So that's the Hudson River Valley just north of New York City. That was the site of ongoing military conflict right up until 1782. And again, no real record of what action he saw there, but I do note that he walked 220 miles to get there and 220 miles to get back. And then when he was 40 years old, Brent Nichols enlisted one more time, this is in 1780, as part of a levy for quote-unquote 6 months men, which was raised by the town of Cohasset. And we have some military records from that time. At that time he's listed as Negro, so we know he's black. And he's listed as being 5 foot 11 inches tall, which is fairly tall for that age, for that era. So he and the troops arrived in Springfield, New Jersey on July 19th. This was a month after the Battle of Springfield, which was the last major battle of New Jersey. So the major battles were over, but British troops were still very much active in the area. And by October 25th, 1780, he's under the command of Brigadier General John Patterson at Camp Totowa. Am I pronouncing that right? Totowa? In New Jersey. So he was part of a large force camped on the 2 heights above the Totowa River from October 9th through October 27th, 1780. So this Camp Totowa, just 20 miles from British-occupied New York. So they're right on, close to the front lines. They had 5 brigades of the main army, plus 2 brigades of the elite light infantry. And we know that the army was in tough shape at that time. Some of the soldiers' clothes were in rags. Sometimes they didn't get enough to eat. Nevertheless, they were an able fighting force. So the British attempted only one attack on Camp Totowa while Brent Nichols was there. And that happened when they followed a band of Americans who had been out on a foray, but the British were quickly driven back. They made the mistake. The Americans burned the bridge as they retreated away from the British troops. And the British made the mistake of trying to wade the river, and they were just like shooting fish in a barrel, almost literally. So Brent Nichols, perhaps he went out on one of those forays against the British, or perhaps he was one of the ones who stayed in camp to help defend it. Again, we don't really know what happened. So his service in New Jersey proved to be his last term of military service, or the last one that we have a record of. So that means he served, we know of, 5 different times. He served a few days with the local militia in 1776, and a total of about 10 months with the Continental Army in 4 different terms of service. And while traveling to and from military service, I tried to add it up, and I think I came up with the astounding total distance of about 1,700 miles. And again, sometimes maintaining a punishing pace of 25 miles a day. Now, that's most of what we know about Brent Nichols. We don't know how he was freed. We know he became free. We don't know if he freed himself through his military service. We don't know when he became free. After the war, what we do know is he lived on North Street in Hingham. He and his wife Phoebe had a daughter named Nancy. Phoebe had been enslaved by the Nichols family at the same time Britain had been, so that's probably when they met. Britain and Phoebe sometimes worked for the Barker sisters in Hingham, two unmarried women who lived near them on North Street. And Britain also kept a small store, but apparently he didn't make much money from the store. And in 1790, the first U.S. Census finds him living in Hingham as a free black man with his wife, sharing a house with a free black person named Experience. And by 1800, he was living with just his wife, Phoebe, still in Hingham. So he died on January 30th, 1810. He would have been about 59 years old. And Phoebe died in 1826 while living in the Hingham poorhouse, which is kind of sad for a military widow to wind up in a poorhouse, but that's the way it was. So in any case, as is so often when you're researching working class and enslaved Americans from the 18th to the 19th century, you wind up with more questions that you want to ask than you have answered. So here's some of my questions, and I'm throwing this out because I know some of you are local historians, and you may have some knowledge and you may be willing to do some research to find these out. Where was Britt Nichols born? Was he first or second generation? And what African language and culture did he know? What was the rest of his life like? We might be able to find that out. There might be records somewhere in archives or in family, in somebody's attic. So what was the rest of his life like? We'd love to know that. Why did he leave Cohasset to leave Hingham? And this is important for us in Cohasset because by 1790, there were 0 black people in Cohasset. Whereas earlier, we know there are quite a few black people. Woody's done a lot of the work around how many black people there were in Cohasset. And then what I really want to know is, do his descendants still live in the area? And there's a very good chance that they do. So perhaps someday we'll have answers to these questions. But in the meantime, I hope you, and I get choked up because I'm a patriotic guy. So every day on Patriots Day, I get choked up about this. But I hope you remember Britt Nichols on Patriots Day coming up. Patriots Day is not just for the marathon and the Red Sox. It's actually a big deal for some of us. So think of Britt Nichols on Patriots Day. And every time you walk by that new Revolutionary War monument down by Cohasset Harbor, look for his name and send up a little prayer for him. Thank you. Oh, I don't know anything, but I'll come and stand by you.
Afterwards, come find the Historical Society, sign up for our e-newsletter, and if you would like to help contribute to finding more research on these interesting
So I'm just going to comment. One thing that was made clear is that these were not professional soldiers, that they were engaged in different battles at different times. It wasn't like they were the official British regiment where they were soldiers and they were there all the time as British regulars. There was no regular army, perhaps maybe on the
There was, but it was combined. There were militia units like Benjamin Lincoln. That was a huge militia unit. And there were Continental soldiers. They were tough. And they were on the left-hand side of the American line there with Arnold. Danny Morgan, he was just about as tough as they come. He had the Virginia Riflemen, those were Continentals. And Henry Dearborn from New Hampshire had a large group of Rangers. They were incredibly tough. Most of them had fought at Bunker Hill, at Trenton, at Canada. So there was a lot of good American experience on the left-hand side of the line. Gates put the militia on the right-hand side of the line, and that was the last resort because he wasn't so confident about the militia.
Oh, yeah.
So. Didn't the French Indian War also lend to the training, if you will, and the experience of fighting with a musket? So that was also a factor, I believe.
Right. A lot of the American officers had fought the French.
And we had Cohasset men in the French and Indian War who were experienced and knew their stuff,
They know how to
without a doubt.
prime and load.
Yeah.
Did you come across any research within the British General Gage, whose descendants eventually settled Gagetown, Brunswick?
No, just that he was the commander of the British forces here in Boston.
Oh, in Boston?
Yes.
And you don't know?
I haven't followed him regularly, I don't know.
Any books might suggest that, because I've seen it mentioned, but obviously there was something of the British soldier that.
There's some recent books on the siege of Boston. I can't think of one right offhand, but anything on the siege of Boston, he was commander of the British forces in Boston. He left in that fleet with them to go to Nova Scotia. Yeah.
Uh-oh, she's trouble. She's a professional tour guide.
I'm a loyalist family.
Okay.
What do you got, Mary?
I just wondered if there was a headstone for Nichols anywhere.
I'm not aware of that, and that's one of the questions that I have is where is he buried? I don't know.
Be nice to get a government stone on his
Yeah.
burial site.